Oh, that's the one. I didn't have to click go live. I just needed to grab that there. Okay, my bad. Okay, well, we're live early, so you get to see behind the scenes tech issues. I know you want to work. I should get this annoying thing we don't like. And we'll plug that in there. Just don't think that I can handle it. Don't do that to me. Okay, perfect. Well, we shouldn't have gone live because we're running a little late. We're having some tech issues. Don't fall apart. Hey, we're already recording, so there's no pre-show. I accidentally hit broadcast.
Hey there.
Hey, how you doing?
Just living the dream. How about you?
It's a fun dream, isn't it? I'm doing all right, thank you. If I'm not so far behind, we'll get this done. Let's see. Let's go to that. Did you get a chance to utilize any part of the website? Oh, I'm still working on trying to get it so that it'll have the right width to it. I know that you're missing a lot of what's on the website because I didn't design it very well.
I haven't I haven't checked the update. I went back on I think it was like a couple days after we had talked about it last, and I have something going on with my computer as well.
It's not better yet. I haven't fixed the issue yet. I've been trying to find the way to fix it, and I haven't got there yet. So it won't be any better.
Oh, okay.
Basically,
yeah, no, I think
basically what you can see is the middle content, which is like all the text and most of the videos, but the recommended readings and the map for getting back and forth between sections, everything that's over on the sides, it just won't show it even with a scroll bar. And I know what the problem is, but I can't figure out how to fix it. So
yeah, I think that's no biggie. I think that's I can still accomplish the main things on the site.
Yeah, sure, but it is a bummer. What did you think about Lewis?
I was not I wasn't the biggest fan. I have different sort of like, I don't know, kind of my current take on it is it might be a different take than it would be if I had a week or so to like clear my and here's why is that so basically I have this bad habit of when I read somebody or something that I get a wrong impression from, I get really annoyed. And especially if I have this like caricature, like a maybe, I don't know what you call it, straw man or whatever. I have this image or identity that I think that they're coming from, and I get really annoyed by it. And this guy kind of annoyed me. And I just wasn't, I don't know, I wasn't like maybe as motivated to understand what exactly he was like.
Sure.
Basically, I feel like for as short as it was, he still found a way to make it long-winded. And I don't know, like I just feel like what was lacking was him being concise, because I think I have an idea of what he was getting at. But I think part of what made me irritated was that he did, in my opinion, such a poor job of expressing that sentiment, and so that left me wondering, was that really what he was trying to say, or was he just bad at saying it?
Yeah. So I that's what I would have guessed your reaction would be. Mine was very similar to that, actually. So I've been saying that the compatibilists are really interesting, and we're going to look at some of them. He's sort of, I said there's kind of two kinds of compatibilists. There's the really interesting, what I would call positive compatibilists. And then there's guys like Lewis who basically are trying to explain away the problem. And I, I think I struggle with exactly the same approach to it. Like, it feels to me like, okay, man, are you sure you're really making important points here? Are you really getting at something? Yeah. So I actually felt the same way. You know, what's interesting is that so we could call the negative compatibilists something like pseudo problemists in a sense. They're kind of, in one way or another, sometimes with a little exploration, but sometimes just through an examination of language, they're trying to explain away the problem and say, no, you can still hold on to determinism and there's still free will, because you don't understand that the idea of free will that you care about isn't threatened by determinism. And so they do this sort of house cleaning of the ideas. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're sort of in that camp. The guy we're going to read after this is one of the greats, and oddly enough, he's in exactly that camp. So my feeling is with Lewis, you should sort of roll your eyes a little bit. I mean, it's fun to read, and I'm sure, he's very smart and whatever. But Lewis gives me a lot of eye rolling. And so hopefully this class won't even be that long where we'll have to look at him too much. But then John Stuart Mill, what's annoying about him is that he actually is doing the exact same thing, but he's ridiculously brilliant. So we'll really carefully go through his. At the end of the class, I decided to add a section where we're going to talk about what I call the positive compatibilists, the ones who they're not trying to say just that the problem is a pseudo problem and here's how I can clarify the ideas so that you can see they don't contradict with each other. They do a little bit of that, but beyond that, they sort of quasi-speculatively try to describe how it is that you could emerge a real kind of freedom out of a deterministic world. So it's really going further. I don't think I said that very well. So the pseudo-problemists, what I'm calling like the negative pseudo-problemists or the negative compatibilists, these pseudo-problemists, it's mostly just reducible to you're all using language improperly. You're making a mistake and you're fooling yourself into thinking there's a problem. The positive compatibilists, which we will look at the end of the course, because I'm going to add a little section on one of them, they do a little bit of that, but then they say the burden's still on me to show you how you could really have a real idea of freedom, the idea that really matters to you, how that could emerge. And they're a lot more interesting to read, I think. So I think we'll do a lot of eye rolling with Lewis. Oddly enough, we're going to be really paying careful attention to Mill, because even though he's sort of in a similar camp, he's way more serious, and what he writes, you really have to go through carefully. So we'll get through both of those, and then we have some more pseudo-problemists, and then we're going to read some guys that attack the pseudo-problemists and say, look, you can't just play. You can't look at language enough to say that we've all been playing a word game. You're missing the point of the problem, and the problem's still real. And then we have a few more interesting people to look at. But we'll take a quick glance at the positive, what I'm calling the positive compatibilists at the end. So yeah, hopefully today, when we get started in a minute or two, will be not that long. And Path, how did you feel about Lewis?
He was okay. I feel like he did a good job. I was with him, but then he provided examples, which aren't coming to mind right now. But some of his proof was lacking, But
Like what specifically? Do you
Yeah,
wish
I
you
can't
approved
remember
more?
it off the top of my head right now, unfortunately, and I didn't
That's
take
okay.
notes. I should have. I
No,
should
that's
have.
okay. But you remember being
Yeah,
dissatisfied with his support.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, sorry for the late start. We'll get started in a minute or two. I hit broadcast already, so we're actually live right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that though. That was kind of what annoyed me was that it was like he just like believes that it is this way because it ought to be or something like I don't know. I think what it was originally that kind of annoyed me was that um well, the one guy that I know that we talk like theological conversations and we he has this sort of hardline fundamentalist bent, and it just reminded me of that sort of similar sentiment in which it's just um like darn it, it's just darn it, we have free will, and I know he didn't say we have free will, but he it's that sentiment of like we all have um moral responsibility for our choices just because it ought to be that way, and it's just like, well, you didn't he just expressed his sentiment for what he thinks that it should be that way. But
I agree, and then I also amplify on that. I say that, I mean, from some of his arguments, he's just like he made statements about, well, that's just what you do, kind of. That's just what you do, as far as like being morally, you know, acting in a certain way. That's just what you do. And it was assumption that was built into his argument. And when he came to that point, because that's just what we do, he literally said something just like that, if I recall correctly. And I'm like, I mean, not everybody does that. Not everybody has the agency or the ability to do those things, first of all, let alone the moral compass, to be directed that way. Anyway, sorry for interrupting you there.
no, that was that I I agree with that. I mean, I was left definitely disappointed. I struggled to finish it because like halfway through I was like getting to the halfway point, I was like, all right, we might be getting somewhere, and then as I'm coming to the end, it's like that, where's the meat? It's like what like what was this like what was this for? And usually
I
when you go ahead.
You never thought somebody could make you want Henry Buckle again.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely like I would say for me, Paul Ray is definitely like, sort of the best writer in my opinion, even though I probably don't take his view necessarily. And then it's like probably, for me, it's like Paul Ray first, William James, Henry Thomas, and then this guy is probably at the bottom.
I think that ranking's pretty good. Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. Paul Ray. Paul Ray is definitely a fun one to read. So we're going to treat the subject fairly. We're going to read his essay and we're going to look for whatever's strong about it, and we're going to highlight that today. But I largely feel exactly the same way you guys feel about this. One of the dangers of playing this both sides game that the compatibilists are doing is that you're likely to just piss off both sides. You can imagine a determinist saying, "Hey, wait a minute, determinism means more than that." Especially Paul Ray. And you can imagine a libertarian saying, "Hold on a second, wait a minute, where's the real freedom?" And this is actually the problem that the compatibilists, even the better ones, and we're going to be reading some better ones, this is the problem they always face, is that they're hated by both sides because the libertarians think that you're giving a cartoon version of freedom that's not really, really freedom, which is what they want. And the determinists are saying, hold on a second, you're trying to give space for these magical ideas that, they would regard them as magical. Obviously, Lewis isn't talking in magical terms, but you're giving way too much space for these things. We already showed that if you're hard and you're scientific and you're serious, you'll see that none of that is real. And the compatibilists, again, there are more interesting ones, and there's some that are really, really intriguing, and they're quite sophisticated in their approach. But they all run the risk, whether they're interesting or not, of just ticking off both sides, which is fun. We'll keep the battle going. So let's see. The time is now. Let's get started. Okay. So, quick summation. His essays, Law and Morality, is the first section. The legal definition, the legal, so he's going to draw this distinction, responsibility in this context versus this context. He's going to try to like clarify what we mean that way. So the legal definition of responsibility is subject to punishment if you cannot give a good enough account for yourself. Something like that. Okay. But law and morality are not the same. It is sometimes immoral to do things. Let me see if I can take this off. Is there any sort of an echo while we're talking? I don't think so.
Not on mine.
Yeah. So I'm going to take the headphones off because I realized I shout because I'm not used to the cans. So just see how this goes. So law and morality are not the same thing. It's sometimes immoral to do things which are legal, and it is sometimes moral to do things against unjust laws, right? We're familiar with this distinction. It's fair enough. So he's just saying these are two different areas where we use the same word responsibility. Maybe there's an ambiguity and we're just misusing the term. There are three potential justifications for punishment: retributive, reformative, and deterrent. All three may have merit. But I only affirm deterrence as the only justification for punishment I find demonstrably legitimate. Okay, so once again, he's a compatibilist. He's got a foot in both camps, and the legal theory is evolving around this time, and deterrence seems to be the only thing that they think is justifiable. All right. Just setting the stage. Punishment and freedom. Some go further and notice that this deterrence is justifiable even if we are determined to act the way we do by adding consequences into the calculations of determined choices. That's pretty fair and easy. I think even Paul Ray said that. He said, look, people are robotic machines, and so they're calculating based on their impulses and their inclinations and their desires and their temptations. All of those things are caused and determined, and then those things in kind cause your decisions, your wills, your actions, and it's just an unbroken chain of determinism. But if we add punishment to certain things we don't find agreeable, like murder, then that becomes one of the things that's factored in that helps to determine that people will not murder. And so they think it's justifiable to punish, even though Paul Ray thinks there's no such thing as moral responsibility. Now, Lewis is going to say, well, there's no such thing as moral responsibility, but you're using responsibility in two different senses, and he's going to try to rescue responsibility from that. Okay. Some go further still and say that moral responsibility is like legal responsibility, in that it is defined as opening up oneself to punishment. Here there is an error. Moral accountability is not mainly defined by relationship to punishment. Moral responsibility is prior to punishment, and it calls for a sort of freedom which is not disclosed, but rather obscured by easy assimilation of morality to law. Right? So let's push these two realms and draw a line between them because they're getting muddied together. So let's make this distinction clear, because Paul Ray thinks we have no moral responsibility, and I think he's just falling for an ambiguity equivocation here. All right, let's see how he makes his case. Moral goodness and badness differs from other forms of goodness and badness. Okay, how so? The special freedom is the difference. He has this term, special freedom. It is the freedom of choice. Only that makes sense of the feelings of guilt or about wickedness. It hinges on the ability to have done otherwise. So, again, I feel the sense of, well, wait a minute, you're just sort of asserting these things right now, but let's move on and see. The area of absolute choice. So he defines this area of absolute choice, which is different from legal responsibility concepts. Okay. When properly moral matters are concerned, we have a moment of absolute choice. This does not mean that we can act out of character in any way at any time, a randomness and irrational absurdity which libertarians are accused of more often than they commit, but only that there are no moral realities if there are no moments of absolute choice. And so some of these moments must exist. So before we go on, let's be really clear about what Lewis is claiming and what he's not. So he's not an extreme libertarian who's saying everything that you think you're choosing freely. No, no, no. He's saying, yeah, maybe 90% of people, maybe 98% of the choices of the remaining 10% are all very much describable in this deterministic sense. However, there is an idea of guilt and blame and moral responsibility that seems to mean something, right? So at the one side, he's sort of got a foot in determinism, but then he's doing the thing the libertarians do, which is he's saying, well, we do have some kind of moral responsibility, and we couldn't if determinism was the whole story. So there's got to be something wrong with this formula, and he wants to have it both ways. Okay, there are some moments of absolute choice, is all he's claiming. And so some of these moments must exist, because there are moral realities. And since there are, and those are different from legal realities, those moral realities exist. And since they do, there just has to be absolute choice as an element of being. That's how he's making his argument. It's kind of cool. We run like robots or NPCs most of the time, doing what our character makes us want to do. But in the moments when we have second-tier volitions, when we think it our duty to want something other than what we want, to act in a way other than we're inclined to act, those are the moments of absolute choice, that, or at least where they become possible and explain moral responsibility. Now, I'm using a lot of words that he didn't use, obviously, not just NPCs and robots, but second-tier volitions, which we've mentioned from another thinker. But this is his idea. His idea is usually you're basically a robot. Fine. Usually you're not much of a mathematician either, but when you sit down to do your accounting, you start doing arithmetic, right? So you're thinking like a mathematician in that situation. It doesn't have to be that everything you're doing is completely unhinged from causality. Generally, you're completely describable in that deterministic sense, but some of the things you do cause you to feel guilt and blame and shame, and there's a moral sense of responsibility that's prior to punishment. It's not that you did something that we have a right to punish or that we want to punish. It's just that everybody cringes when they think about it, and so do you. And so since that happens, there must be, the only way that that could be a logical thing that happens in the universe, he's claiming, is that there are moments where you could be programmed to want to do one thing, but think to yourself, the right thing to do would be this instead. And so even though I am inclined in this direction like a robot, there's a part of me that says that's the right thing to do. And in just those moments where you have a conscience that says, no, don't do that thing, or do this thing instead, that's when you have a morally significant choice that you can make. And so you might do the right thing or you might do the wrong thing, but you have moments of absolute choice, and they might be rare. Maybe you only have 3 of them in your lifetime, or maybe only 1, or maybe only 2% of the population ever has these things, and everybody else is like a robot. He's not putting numbers on it, but basically he's not claiming some sort of general rule that this is the way it is every time you think you're choosing. He just says only in these very specific moments where everything about you wants to run away from the fire, but one thing in your mind is, I should go in and make sure that everybody else is out, or there's the child that's still in the house and I got to go try to bring them out even if I die trying or something. And if you think to yourself that and you still run out, then you feel really guilty. If you think to yourself that and you choose to do the opposite of what every part of you is programmed to want to do, he's saying something like that, then you've made a morally good choice and you had a moment of absolute choice either way. Okay. When our desires conflict, we have morally significant choices to make, and these choices are between real possibilities. It is the choice to make an effort that's free. Okay, this is kind of cool. He's very much limiting how much choice we have. Now, we're going to see some other guys that limit it way more, and of course, Paul Ray just flat out denies it in all sorts of different positions. But it's important to know that Lewis isn't saying you're free every time you think to do something or whatever. He's very much limiting it to the moments where you have conflict of interest, and the only freedom you really have is the choice to make an effort, to try to push against what's pushing you in another direction. And he says, look, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And there's no other way to describe that except to say some part of you is a power that manifests itself to push against the programming. And since that's the case, what else are you going to call that except moral responsibility, moral significance, freedom? That's what he thinks is freedom. And he's described it. And he said, well, there you go. That exists. Okay. Moral worth or blame exists here in regards to the effort we make or do not make. Quote, but that we should continue to regard ourselves as responsible beings liable to have to make excruciating moral choices and not merely be deciding what our preferences are, is of the utmost importance for the worth and dignity of human life as a whole, it probably said, and for the health of society. We need to believe we are responsible if we are to be healthy and have a healthy community in which to exist. So that's it. There's some interesting thoughts in there. Why don't we start talking about this? What do you think about the idea that somebody could say society, life, culture, this whole civilization thing we're doing, it couldn't possibly continue. It couldn't possibly be what it's been to get us to where we are if there weren't this moment, these absolute choice moments where you have the freedom to make an effort, to push against your programming and to push against your desires. And so since that's necessary for what we are, and here we are being what we are, necessarily there must be that kind of freedom. And it's very, very limited to just those moments where you're inclined one way, but some part of you says, I should do the right thing, where you have any freedom at all. So he's not saying there's freedom in everything and all sorts of the cosmos has freedom and libertarianism sewn into it, and the determinism doesn't overarch and generally control. He's saying, no, all of that's the case. But every once in a while, a few people at certain situations have this moment where you know what I'm talking about. You're in a moment where everything tells you to do this, except that you internally think that's not the right thing. I should do this instead. And in those moments, you have blame, you have guilt, you have pride, you do something laudable. And all of those things make sense to us, and they couldn't make sense unless that what I'm describing is real. And what I'm describing is your experience, and it is real. So accept that as the definition of freedom and choice, and have your cake and eat it too, in a sense. What do you guys think?
I'm not the biggest fan of I feel like it has these, like it rests on a foundation of stuff that is just like cartoonishly stupid. And so one of them is and who knows, I might be wrong here, but
Go ahead.
I feel like what underpins it is this idea of like objective morality, or like objective, like there's right and there's wrong and there's no gray area, and like we are just programmed to know the difference. And it's not to like dismiss sentiments of objective truth or anything, but I think there's also this cartoonishly stupid idea of morality that like there's just a lot of people who think in these black and white ways, that it's like we just all have this like some like magical knowingness of right and wrong, and there's always a right and wrong in every situation, when in truth I think that most moral issues it's a gray area. And I'm like, I can just
all right.
think of
well I would agree that wouldn't be a very good. I wonder if he's really doing that though. Let's say he is doing that. What if we had an alternative Lewis who wasn't doing that, who was saying, no, I totally agree with you. Most of your decisions are morally ambiguous. Most of them are not morally significant. Most people have no idea what the right thing to do is, but a few people do occasionally. Sometimes you think, I should not cheat on the homework. I should rescue the kitten in the burning building. I should do something other than what I feel inclined to do. And in just those few moments for those few people, what we're describing there is the freedom to push back against that which would push you in another direction. And there's no other word for that, according to him, except freedom. But he's limiting it just to that, right? So he's not saying everybody knows what's right to do in all cases, and every time you make a decision, that part of you is enacted. What if he's not saying any of that? What if he's saying, oh, of course, most of it's black and white, or most of it's gray and very complicated, but occasionally everything is pushing you in one way, except that you know that the other thing is right. And that happens too. What if that's all he was saying?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't disagree as strongly, but I feel like he didn't. I mean, I guess, is he stating, like, I'd have to wonder if he's stating this on, like, appealing to intuition or something, because I don't know that it doesn't come to mind to me that, like, this happens. And so I like, he doesn't really state it with any support. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I definitely agreed with you earlier that I rolled my eyes at a lot of what he was saying here. Let's take a look at one of his examples and see if that helps us to figure it out. It would be absurd if it meant that we could act out of character at any time or in any regard, right? He's very much limiting this to just certain situations. What was the case he had here? I think it was something about him giving a speech when the bombs are dropping, or something like that, right? Or was I reading from a different section?
So it seems to me like if he was just trying to prove that, so it's all you have to do to disprove determinism is that free will exists sometimes, and that was his objective. It seems like, and I feel like he did that. But for me, I take, like, once he gets downstream from his first initial presentation and assumption, and he starts getting into the evidence, then it starts getting a little, he's like over explaining it, and he's getting into faulty examples. But I feel like he did. But I feel like he did prove. I feel like he did prove that free will does exist in certain situations. And if that was his objective, I feel like, well, reasonable doubt for sure, right? Like, once you get downstream from that, then some of the examples are a little, well, you're assuming a lot of morality that isn't always assumable or presumable or anything like that. So, just like Midnight was saying, or similar to what Midnight was saying. And
all right, good. So let's look
I figured I'd throw that in.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So let's look at this example, because remember, he keeps bringing up continuity of character. So, Paul Ray's formula is you have certain inclinations, your constitution, you have things that happen to you and things that surround you that set up your choice. And those two together, if I took them all into account, would tell me what you're going to do. And basically what Lewis is saying is, yeah, you've got a character and it's got continuity. And there's the circumstances you're in. And all of that goes a great deal towards making it possible to predict what you're going to do. And if it wasn't that way, you'd be insulted, right? If somebody said to you, oh, I've known you for so long, I have no idea what you're going to do in this situation, you'd say, wait a minute, don't you know me? What do you mean you know me? Don't you know my character? Right? So he's agreeing with all of that. And then he's saying, but sometimes there are things that push back against even your character. So let's see what he's saying here. So he's in the studio, he's broadcasting, and I probably wrote this down while he was talking. Physically, I could. Oh, wait. So it would be absurd if it meant that we could do anything out of character at any moment. This is the absurdity to which the libertarian is often accused. He's rarely guilty of. He only holds that there are some respects and some occasions when we have what he calls absolute choice. And these are set for us when properly moral matters are involved. He separated morality and legality, and he said proper moral matters, those are the ones involving absolute choice. If you have an absolute choice, you're in that realm. If you're in that realm, absolute choice must be present, the possibility of it. If on the whole, I most want to do one thing, but think it my duty to do something else, Then and only then, it seems to me, I have a choice not determined by character or heredity or environment or anything else. I may do my duty or I may not. The possibilities are genuinely and finally open. It is not genuinely open to me to burst into song in the broadcasting studio. Physically, I could, but I have not the slightest urge to make a fool of myself in that way. It is plainly not my duty to do so. In the last resort, being the person I am, in these circumstances, I am bound to continue my talk to the end. In different conditions, offered a sufficiently large bribe, I might prefer to sing instead, and I might think it my duty to do so if a sufficiently handsome donation were made in return to some important cause. Okay, so right, there's things I can't do. I can't fly out of my chair and go to the moon right now, but there's lots of things I could do in the sense that Paul Ray talks about. It's like it's physically possible that I could stand on my head right now. He says, but there's no freedom. If I go stand on my head, that's all determined. It's determined because I was trying to prove a point about determinism or something. However, if the situation is such that I'm inclined not to do it, nothing about me wants to do it, I don't gain anything from it, but for some reason it feels like a moral duty to do it, that's the moment I have an absolute choice. Let's see how this example gets better here. In the latter case, and perhaps in the first, there would be a real conflict of duty and interest, as there would be, to take a more serious example, if the building were on fire or being bombed, and there was reason, as in a war, why the broadcast should continue. I might, in this case, most want to run from danger, and have thus to make a moral effort, I have to put effort in, to resist the temptation to escape and to overcome my fear. It is the choice to make or not make such an effort that is free. And moral worth or disvalue turns on the effort we make or fail to make in situations of this sort. All right, so what is the situation? The situation is the one that has absolute choice in it. What does that mean? It means it's a situation where if you knew everything about my character and everything about my situations, you would predict I would do X. But there's a part of me that thinks it's a duty to not do X. In that moment, you actually can't predict what I'm going to do until I do one of them. And then you feel a sense of blame or laudation towards me. You want to praise me or you want to say shame on you. And the reason why those things make sense is because they only make sense in situations like that. Now, here's a good question. What would the Paul Ray determinists say to this?
I think what they would say would be the same thing that I would say, which is that I think he's making a unnecessary and useless category called duty, which is really the same thing. It's still your character. It's still continuity of character. Just because you don't see it all the time doesn't mean it's not there. It's still existing in a latent way. And so, right. it will come out in moments like that. And then just because it seems out of place, then he makes this new category called duty.
Yeah. Paul Ray actually said exactly that. He said, what about willpower? Willpower is a part of your character too. Right? So your thought that this is your duty is a part of the antecedents of what's gone into your education and your natural inclinations. That's just one of the factors. He would say that's a small thing that has a mighty pull. And so it's equally balancing out or close to equally balancing out. So without thinking about that, you would say, oh, he's naturally inclined to run from the fire. But if you thought about that, and that's just a part of his character and his upbringing and the things that have happened to him and all of that, the determinists would say that's all factored in. That's part of your character. Look, how can blame and praise mean anything unless it's for your character, right? So you're saying, Lewis is saying this is outside your character. He's saying your standard character is inclined to do this. This is that moral effort to make a choice when you have an absolute choice to make, and that's to fight against your character. Paul Ray explicitly said that your willpower is a part of what's determined. Scott Adams says the same thing. It's One of the problems with the compatibilists, although like I said, we're going to talk about some more interesting ones in some other sections, is that they sort of, well, what they're trying to do is say the problem doesn't really exist, and we're going to see a pseudo problemist later, and we're going to see a response to that, which is to say, look, the problem exists, you just don't want to face it. However, some people could read Lewis and they really could say, that's definitely a different category of choice. I mean, it's maybe in that situation we could use the word freedom, and maybe it's not quite as absolutely free as you want to say it is, but it's definitely different from your other choices. And clearly that he's not wrong. People have decisions like that they make in their lifetime. And, Lewis isn't being absurd. He's not saying everything's like that. He's saying just in these limited circumstances, that's what he wants to say is where morality comes from. A lot of compatibilists do this, by the way. They try to rescue moral responsibility while not denying determinism. So I don't know. We know what the determinists would say in response. I think you're right about that. So does Lewis have much of an argument here? He's saying your character would normally, I'd predict that you would run out of the building, but hey, you feel you have a duty, so you're staying. That's surprising. That's why I'm surprised. And I think, oh, this is like an amazing thing I'm seeing. I feel, awe, and I'm inspired. Or if I watch you run away, I think, oh, what a shameful thing. It does seem at least to be a different category of choice. I mean, we could reduce his argument to, look, moral responsibility means something. You know what we're talking about. So how can that possibly mean something unless there's a way of rescuing choice? There's a way of rescuing you being the thing that is the cause of why we're impressed or ashamed. That general argument seems to be more powerful than maybe the specific one he's trying to make within that field. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that, it like touches on an issue, like you said, that it sounds like Mill and other thinkers, that we'll touch later, sounds like they probably do a better job of clarifying that issue. But I don't, like myself, I guess I just don't see his argument otherwise. I don't think that he did a good job like exploring the good side of the argument that he sort of touched, like the
yeah. That's what the compatibilists are always going to be accused of, and I think that accusation hits Lewis pretty hard, at least in this excerpt. There's others that we're going to be reading, and some of them are more impressive as far as taking the problem really seriously. It's possible that Lewis is right, but it doesn't feel like he's really answering Paul Ray's objections terribly well. The other side of that is that the compatibilists are always attacked by the libertarians who want to say, look, that's not the kind of freedom I'm talking about. It's not just difficult choices. It's real choice and actual agency, and you couldn't predict it at all. And this determinism thing, you're granting it too much space and all of that. So, of course, the compatibilists piss off both sides. I had said earlier, Sivad, we got a very late start, so you didn't miss much. I had said earlier that we're going to be looking at Mill after this, who's very, very similar to Lewis, except, well, Lewis might give us a feeling of you didn't really exactly figure out how bad the problem was, and you didn't maybe solve it too well. John Stuart Mill has a very similar position. It's close, and we're going to take him a lot more seriously. So probably today, because Mill, we just have to go through it very, very carefully. He's just too good of a thinker. So we'll go through Mill on Thursday and Friday, and we'll get to see another position like this. We're going to be reading a pseudo-problemist who's going to be arguing that, it's a problem with language and there's some ambiguity. And so he's going to try to say you can be deterministic and still have freedom. And we've just been confusing ourselves into thinking there's a problem here. we're going to look at other people who say, look, you guys are wrong. You're not taking the problem seriously. The problem really exists. If determinism is true, I'm a robot and there's no getting out of that. So, we're going to see both sides of that, and we're going to see some other interesting psychological approaches. And then I decided I'm going to add a quick section at the very end to look at what I call a positive determinist, in the sense of not a positive attitude, but instead of mostly trying to explain away the problem, they actually feel that they have a burden to still prove how it's possible that you could get something like a real choice out of a deterministic system. And so we'll also look at that before we finish. This is going to be a short one. We've got other things to discuss in the after show. So if anybody wants to say anything else before I end the broadcast, we'll move on to the after show after that. All right, let's do it. Luckily, Lewis is cool. He's interesting. We got to read him, but we're going to move on to Mill on Thursday and Friday, and that's going to be a good time. All right, we'll end this.